Yes. I'd like to welcome everybody tonight for our full council. We don't intend to have any fire drills, so if you do an hear alarm, please make your way out safely and assemble in the car park up on the top level. Thank you. So, first of item, apologies, please. Oh, he's over there now. Tommy.
Yes, Chair, we have apologies from Councillors Hughes, Hobson, Flitter, Purdy, Wakeman, Fitzherbert, Councillor Mrs Morley, Councillor Mr Morley, Councillor Gretrix, Councillor Murphy and Councillor Chapman.
Okay, thank you. Item 2, public participation. You will possibly have all seen in front of you questions and responses. These aren't going to be read out. They will be put on the website if they haven't already been done so. But these are the public questions that have been taken. So have you all had chance to read them? Would you like a couple of minutes? Yeah? Okay, a couple of minutes to just peruse over them. Thank you.
Chair, may I just make a point of order, please? Obviously, we've gone from reading these, people used to come in person and make representation, and now they're being encouraged not to because of COVID. And I just feel that people have taken the time and effort to, initially we were having the responses read out, probably by the leader of the council, who unfortunately can't be with us tonight. Can this be looked at, please, under the Constitution Committee? Because I just feel that people are taking the time and effort to make valid comment into issues that touch upon the council. But it's like not everybody has access to a computer. And how will people in the general public know to look at these documents online? Thank you.
Point taken upon that. And obviously, I take your point as regards to members of the public not being able to come due to COVID, and that will be looked into. I will bring that matter up. Thank you. Okay, members, are we all happy with? Okay, I'm going to move on. Thank you, everybody. So item 3, approval of the minutes from the previous meeting, which is the 3rd of March.
I'll move them, Chair. Second, Chair.
All those in favour, please show. Councillor Salt, are you? Sorry, yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you. Item 4, interests. Has any member got any interest to declare at this point in time? No? Okay, thank you. Leaders' announcements. Obviously, unfortunately, Councillor Purdy is unable to be here tonight. He's contracted COVID, unfortunately, and he's quite poorly, so that will be led for another time. So I would like to then move on now to Chairman's announcements. So, Councillor Wayne.
Thanks very much, Chair. And I'd just like to pass on our best wishes to all those members and members of staff from the organisation that have got COVID and wish them a speedy recovery. I'd just like to say on the 6th of February 2022, I attended a choral evensong for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. I wasn't singing, but it was a very good event. It was a very good event. On the 26th and 27th of February 2022, I attended, along with my wife, Derbyshire Amateur Swimming Championships at the Ark in Matlock. I'd like to say this was a really well-organised event, enabling hundreds of young swimmers to showcase their talents. It also portrayed the Ark Leisure Centre, one of our assets, in a very positive light. It was reassuring for me, having been in a number of meetings where we've gone and allocated funds to Freedom Leisure, but to see all those young people thriving and, you know, challenging each other, it was very, very reassuring. Plus it puts, you know, it puts pounds in our local economy. So that was great. On the 2nd of March, I attended Ashbourne Shrovetide luncheon at Ashbourne Leisure Centre, where I was introduced to the Turner-Upper, Roger Jones. And I'd like to thank Councillor Bull and Councillor Lees for their help on that day. Myself and my wife truly enjoyed the experience, and it was the first time I've ever attended that event and not been involved in the actual game. And it was very frustrating because I got this round my neck, but that's that. You'll be pleased to know the final thing. On the 17th of March, I attended Bakewell, Brassington and Steeple Arch cemeteries and took part in the consecration of new areas of ground. The services were conducted by the Bishop of Repton, and I'd like to thank all those district councillors who attended the respective services. And again, it was a really enjoyable thing, something that I never thought I would have been doing in my lifetime. But thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Councillor Lane. Item 7, to receive the non-exempt minutes of the other council meetings. So we've had the council meeting on the 27th of January, Planning Committee, Extraordinary Council and Community Environment. We've all had the minutes.
May I raise a point of order here, Chair, please?
Councillor O'Brien.
Chair, this point of order relates to minute 291/21 of item 6 of the Community and Environment Committee, which was held on 23rd of February. This is the item which considered Her Majesty the Queen's Jubilee Fund. Part 3 of our Constitution, paragraph C on page 3 of it, reserves to the Council considering all proposals which seek to establish new policy or which seek a significant departure from existing policy. Now, in my opinion, this particular item was a new proposal, entirely new proposal, and therefore was not within the remit of the Community and Environment Committee to be considered. It should have been reserved to Council as per the Constitution. I therefore put to you that the minute decision was ultra vires and that the matter should be brought to the next appropriate meeting of the Council for consideration and decision.
Right, Councillor O'Brien, I'm just going to move over to legal to explain.
Thank you, Chair. This was raised by Councillor O'Brien earlier. I have emailed him back at 3:45, so apologies if you've not seen that. But if I just read the response that I emailed, I'd like to say first, my first point is I don't consider this to be a valid point of order. I accept the Constitution in Part 4, 1812, that a point of order is in respect of alleged breach of the Council's rules, procedure or the law. I accept this is open to interpretation, but the reason for a point of order is stop the Council from doing something wrong before it happens. Item 7 on the agenda is to approve the minutes of the meeting. If you say the minutes are wrong, then that's a valid objection, but the minutes are correct. They should be approved even if the decision is considered incorrect, as you are approving what happened, not if what happened was legally correct. I consider the correct procedure, if you think the Council has made an illegal decision, is use the provisions under Part 4 of Section 24 to seek a rescission of the preceding decision on the grounds that the original decision was ultra vires, or to use the judicial review provisions. That said, I do not believe that Section 24, that said, the main issue is whether the decision on the Jubilee is a policy or not. On review of the minutes and the reports of C&E on the 23rd of February, I cannot see how this can be a policy. If it was a decision for all future public celebrations, setting a precedent on how the council will deal with these in future, then yes, that could be. But this is a one-off scheme. The budget proposal will be sent to council, which it needs to be, and events fall within the remit of the Community Environment Committee. Thank you, Chair.
So with that, I move back.
Wait a minute, sorry. If Councillor O'Brien has not got anything to say, I would like to make an objection to the minutes, and I don't think they're correct from that item. I've looked at the minutes, I've looked at that meeting, and the proposer who put that motion forward did accept the principle that there would be delegated authority to officers to use any money from the 38,000.
I'm going to stop you now because we're literally going too deep into this. This is all about the minutes. I take the point that you don't feel that they are right. As regards that, it's not about the outcome of what the decisions that were made within it.
But it is, because it's a fund of money now that's not been minuted, that the proposer did actually put forward that they would use, and that's the 38,000 from the other. If there was any outstanding, that would be used for
so as far
parish
as you're
meetings.
Concerned, you don't wish to vote on the community environment of that being wrong.
I'm going to vote against the minutes, yes.
Thank you.
Chair, as I would say that if that's put forward, then anyone else at the meeting that considered that motion was put forward and voted on and approved agrees with Councillor Gamble, then they should raise that objection. But if they believe the minutes are correct, then they vote for them. So my recommendation is we go to the vote on the minutes.
Okay. So we're going to the vote on the minutes that have been put in front.
Chair, can I just ask, can we isolate those minutes from
Okay. So we will do council, planning committee and extraordinary council meeting.
Sorry, Chair,
all in favour?
Chair, on my point of order, could I ask that my point of order is minuted in this meeting?
Your point of order will be minuted, although it wasn't classed as a point of order. It was a statement of fact that something wasn't fully divulged, not the minutes that weren't right.
Can I have it minuted that I don't think the minutes are
minutes.
correct?
No more on that one. All in favour of those minutes that I've already stated, council, planning and extraordinary council. All in favour, please show. Thank you. And now for the Community and Environment Committee. As Leah said on the legal side, those members that were part of it, have they got a problem with it? If they had, I would have thought they'd have probably put something forward. I think it's more about the decision. So all those in favour of the community environment, please show hands. Against? Abstentions? Thank you. That is noted in the minutes. Thank you. Item 8, questions from members. Again, I will refer to Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, because Councillor Purdy and Councillor Hobson is not available, then Procedure Rule 15.5c, where a reply cannot conveniently be given orally, a written answer will be circulated later to the questionnaire, and therefore, as there is no one here to give those answers, the answers will be circulated later. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So, we will move on to item 9, the 3-yearly review of the gaming licensing policy and strategy. Statement, sorry. Councillor, Mr. Braund, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully this is quite a straightforward report. One of the functions the Council provides through its licensing team is to license gambling establishments. And within the report, it gives a description of what those gambling establishments are. We have to have a policy that enables us to do that. It's called a Statement of Principles. We've had that statement in place for many years, and every 3 years we have to review it. The The review took place. There have been a few minor administrative changes. It's been subject to consultation and no comments have been received. It's also been considered by the Licensing and Appeals Committee. However, in order to be formally adopted, the policy has to come here for Council to consider it. I've nothing further to add to that. It's quite a straightforward report, I think, but members may disagree.
Thank you for that. With this already coming through licensing, I'd like to move straight to debate. So do I find a proposer? Councillor Lees.
Yeah, I'd like to propose the chair as written.
Donnelly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wishing to make any comments? And we'll go to the vote. All in favour, please show. Against? Abstentions? Councillor Gamble, are you participating? Thank you. Item 10, Capital Strategy Report for 2023 and 22-23. Karen, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of a capital strategy is to provide a high-level overview of how proposed capital expenditure and capital financing are aligned, and to highlight the implications for future financial sustainability. So in other words, to make sure that we've got enough resources to fund our capital programme. There's a few points in the report I'd like to highlight to members. Paragraph 1.4 of the report sets out the two main changes impacting the capital strategy this time. These are revisions to the Prudential Code and to the implementation of accounting standards IFRS 16 for leases. The Prudential Code is issued by SIPFA and is based on government advice. And this sets the framework for all our capital expenditure and particularly for borrowing. And the new edition of the Prudential Code, which was published in November, now stipulates that it's not prudent for local authorities to make any investment or spending decision that may lead to new borrowing unless it's directly and primarily related to the functions of the authority. So this is aimed at those authorities that were buying hotels or shopping centres outside their district. It's not something that this council's done or is planning to do, so it shouldn't really have a vast impact on our authority directly. But there is an indirect consequence, and that is if that will come into play if the council intends to borrow from the Public Works Loans Board for its future programme. Because if we now intend to borrow from the Public Works Loans Board, then I will have to sign to say that the council hasn't got any spending plans, whether they're from borrowing or not, that include the acquisition of assets primarily for yield. So, as I say, we haven't ever done that before, but now, even if we wanted to, even if we were using our own reserves and borrowing, we'll be blocked from any other borrowing if we were to consider that. So I wouldn't be able to recommend that in future. Capital expenditure also includes capital investments and corporate investments. So we've included the corporate investment strategy at Appendix 1. That's been updated to reflect the change in the Prudential Code I've just mentioned, removing any references to investments that would be primarily for yield. You will see in the strategy there are still references to projects making a return and so on, and that's good practice if we can do that. We have had, and we've got in the capital programme now, some projects that will make a yield. We're hoping that the cinema project will make a return on the investment, and also I think the solar array project is intended to make a return. So we're allowed to have projects that make an investment return, so long as the purpose of those projects is not primarily for yield and that it's in line with the council's objectives. So those particular projects are being carried out for regeneration and for climate change purposes and not primarily for yield. We do have some borrowing from previous capital expenditure, and we have to set aside amounts from the revenue account to make the repayments of that debt. I think I've mentioned to councillors before that borrowing expires in 2056, and at the moment we're only paying interest on it. We repay the loan itself at the end of the period. So that interest and the way we deal with that comes under the minimum revenue provision strategy, and the statement on that is shown at Appendix 3 to the report. The borrowing strategy is set out in paragraphs 121 to 124 of the report, and we seek to strike a balance between having cheap short-term loans that allow us to access our funds quite quickly and give us good liquidity, and some long-term fixed-rate loans where the future cost is known but it's a lot higher. The current capital programme doesn't indicate new borrowing is required at this stage, but officers are monitoring that closely. We know that the balances on reserves set aside to fund the capital programme are reducing, and I've said at previous meetings that it's likely that we'll need to borrow to finance any significant new capital schemes because we won't have the internal reserves left anymore. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Councillor Ratcliffe.
Thank you, Chair. I'm so far away this evening, I wasn't sure if you could see me there.
Yes, I can see.
I'll stand up. I wonder if you could give me a comment, please, Karen, on paragraph 1.4 in relation to the Public Works Loan Board and the point about the capital spending plans that do not include the acquisition of assets, primarily for yield. And I'm thinking, again, this paragraph in relation to 1.43, which talks about, of course, the Matlock Cinema and Bakewell Road development. But you do make the comment there that that shouldn't affect future funding request to this board. But I'm also thinking that we have made the comment in the past about this specific project perhaps being more suited to a funding loan request rather than using up our own capital or reserves. But you have pointed out why it is more beneficial, as it were, to use our own funds rather than making this sort of intervention. So just a general comment, if you would, please.
Well, as I said in the introduction, the Prudential Code doesn't stop us having projects that make a return. It stops you from having projects where the primary purpose is to make a return. So where we've got a project like the cinema, where its primary purpose is to regenerate the town centre, it's still acceptable to have that make a return to help defray some of our costs. We have discussed that with our advisors, Arlene Close, and to give us a second opinion, and they've assured us that there's no problem there. The second issue about how we finance our capital programme, that's in our own hands to some extent. At the moment, we've always had sufficient reserves to fund projects like these, and when we came with the report in March, as I've said, the current programme doesn't have any borrowing, but you're quite right, if we were to use borrowing in the future, that would give us flexibility to use the reserves for other purposes. At the moment, at the end of the current capital programme, we're predicting there's about £1 million in reserves. So I'm thinking now, rather than dip into that and go further, we might be coming to the time to borrow, which is what I've said the last couple of years. So I'm not against borrowing, but it is more expensive. And if we've got, in effect, savings, why not use those first?
The current rate of interest, by the way, to the public works, it used to be about 2%. It was very advantageous. What is it at the moment with inflation?
I'm not sure what the current rate is. I can tell you the rate we're paying at the moment on the loan we've got is 4.1%. 4.1.
Anybody else wishing to ask any questions? Councillor Cruz.
Thank you, Karen, for the thorough report. There's lots of information to absorb, so it's appreciated. A couple of questions from me. One is, I'm just wondering, in the report it talks about future capital and the risk to being able to cover future capital projects. This particular programme, 22-23, is covered. How do we compare with other councils relative to being able to attract grant funding, and have we got enough resources on that to get money from alternative routes through grant funding? And then the other question I've got is, there's a risk identified in the paragraph 1.5, which is if there was unexpected structural damage to an asset, is there any way that we can cover that off with insurance?
Right, to take your first one about grant funding. In my opinion, I don't know a great deal about what other councils do, but from what I've seen, especially lately, we've been very successful at attracting grant funding. Tim and Joe have attracted quite a lot of funding for decarbonisation schemes, and I know that Steve's working up the Levelling Up Fund bid that we hope to bid for. So we have, and Rob Coggins is always getting grant funding from somewhere. So in my view, I think we have got a good track record. What I have found out more recently, since we've had a new capital accountant who has got knowledge of a few other councils, is that they borrow much more than we have. So I think that our move towards more borrowing will perhaps bring us more in line with other authorities. For your second point about the risk, we do have insurance for our buildings, so you would expect that to be covered. So I've not seen the particular, whether we just put it in just in case the structural damage wasn't covered, but yeah, we do have insurance.
I'm guessing there'll be some excess maybe anyway.
The excess is £10,000.
Just can I just pause there? Sorry, are you having problems hearing,
we are,
Peter?
Chair. We can't
Okay.
Can't hear at all.
Could you move your mic a bit closer, please, Karen? I'm sorry. I don't really. Do you want to put that back a little bit for what you've just asked, and then?
Sorry, Chair. Was there any objection to Councillor Sackling go up to the end there?
Let her have another go at doing it. Just put your question forward again, Councillor Cruz. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
And then hopefully we'll get there.
I'll say thanks again for the thorough report. So let's get that. Let's get that out there. There were two questions. One was on our ability to attract grant funding, because this capital programme 22-23 is covered, but there is a kind of an indication that we're going to struggle in the future. So I was just trying to understand how we compare to other authorities in terms of attracting grant funding. And then the second question I had was around the structural damage to our assets and whether we've got insurance on our major assets to cover that off. Thank you.
So in terms of the first question, in my view, we've got quite a good history of attracting grant funding. We've received quite a lot of funding for decarbonisation schemes very recently. Over £1 million, I think, was reported at the last council meeting. Rob Coggins, the Director of Housing, has received quite a lot of funding for his schemes. And we're currently working, or Steve Capes and his team are currently going to be working up the Levelling Up Fund bid, for which I'm keeping my fingers crossed. Only today, I believe we were awarded some grant funding for the Change in Place toilet scheme That's about £64,000, I think. So I think we've got a good track record there. What I have discovered recently, since we had a new capital accountant who's got experience at a couple of other authorities, is that our level of borrowing is perhaps a lot less. Other authorities rely quite a lot more on borrowing to fund their capital programme, whereas we've not done any borrowing for several years. For your second question about risk, yes, we do have insurance for our major buildings, which I would expect to cover structural damage, and the excess is £10,000.
Thanks for the thorough answers. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much for going through that again. Councillor Slack, did you have a question? It was just the fact that you couldn't hear me. Okay. Right, okay. Can we obviously, all of us, make sure when we are speaking into the mic, and it gives some of our members a chance of hearing what's going on. Is there anybody else who... Oh, sorry, Councillor Wayne, did you wish to make a question? Put a question.
Yeah. Karen, thanks again for the report. I just need to ask something, and it might be something that's very, very... I should know, but I don't know, or I can't bring it to mind at the moment. At 4.2, it says contribution, and it says the authority currently holds 3 retail sites with the intention of generating income. And then it says retail site 1, 2 and 3. Are you able to disclose where they are? And it says with the intention of generating income. When are we likely to anticipate that we will be generating some income? Because that comment shows there's an intention of that. Thank you.
I'd rather not state in public where they are. I can send members details of that in an email. But I can tell you that we've had those sites. We acquired them in 1974 when we came into being, and perhaps it's just the wording's misled you, but they do generate income each year. And the income stated in the table 3. Is it? No, it's not actually. That's the value of them, but they do generate rental income.
Yeah, sorry to put you on the spot there, but it's just with the intention of generating income. I thought they weren't. So, yeah, thank you very much. Cheers.
Councillor Allison.
Thank you, Chair. It's probably a question for Tim, actually. Mention of the changing places funding. Is Sudbury Hall included in that funding? Thank you.
I can answer that, Chair. It's actually the good work of Becky Bryan and Mike Goldsworthy that's got us saying yes. The answer is yes. I did try and catch your eye because I knew you'd be interested.
Is there anybody else wishing to make any questions? Okay, for that, I'd like to move to debate. Councillor Donnelly.
Thank you, Chair. Well, this was very well debated in my meeting last week, and it went through unanimous. And once again, I would like to thank Karen and for my committee for all of her hard work, and I'm sure it'll be very successful. So I'm very happy to move the motion. Thank you.
Does that find a seconder? Councillor Cruz, thank you. Anybody else wishing to make any more comments upon this? Councillor O'Brien.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I'm very pleased that Karen has now acknowledged in a slightly different way the potential to use prudential borrowing to fund the capital programme. And I would actually like to formalise that. And I'll explain why in a moment. I would like to formalise that by way of an amendment to the recommendation. And the amendment would be that in the light of the future constraints on the availability of resources, the next capital strategy report examines the potential for funding the capital programme through potential borrowing. I know Karen has said that's something that they will look to do, but I think it will be helpful if it were formalised. The reason I say that is that clearly there is an issue. I mean, there's an acknowledged issue about how we'll fund the capital programme post-24-25. But I do note that we have currently got a policy which tells us that we will only fund at capital projects through borrowing as a last resort. It is number 7 out of 7 on the mechanisms for funding our programme. That means that although we've got projects such as the solar array in the capital programme, which are going to produce a return, at the moment we are committed to funding those through our savings. That to me is not a terribly sustainable approach, because effectively what it means is rather than having the option as to how to fund our future capital programmes, we're taking a decision now, and it means that if we look to, say, fund a capital project which doesn't produce a return, let's say we want to invest in some capital in some public realm works, we will have no choice but to borrow. So we've got a perverse situation where we're borrowing to fund projects which produce no return, but we're using our savings to fund a project which does produce a return. Now that to me is not a prudent or sustainable way forward. and I think those of you who are in business would accept that borrowing to invest is a prudent way forward. So that's the reason I put that amendment forward, and because I do think we should look seriously at how we fund projects in the programme like the solar array, and not this evening in 2022 commit to funding them in the way that's prioritised in the report. So I'd like to move that amendment, which, as I said, commits us for the next capital programme report to examining the potential to use prudential borrowing.
Karen, have you got any comeback on that for me first?
If that's something that members, if that's something that members want us to look at, we can talk to our investment advisors all in close and undertake that review.
Paul.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think members need to exercise a degree of caution here, because clearly we've got a capital programme which is just over £13 million. And whilst Councillor O'Brien and Karen are absolutely right that there will be occasions when it would make sense for the council to use prudential borrowing to fund some of those schemes, by no means is it likely to be feasible for the capital programme to the extent of £13 million to be funded by borrowing. And I don't think that's necessarily what Councillor O'Brien is suggesting, but the point I'm making is that there will be opportunities where borrowing is appropriate, but there will also be opportunities where borrowing isn't appropriate. And I think you should take the advice of your Section 151 officer, who's clearly advised by the council's advisors as to when it may be appropriate to borrow and when it may not be. I certainly would caution against taking a wholesale approach to borrowing in every instance, or even the majority of instances, because that will have a significant impact on the council's revenue budget.
Chair, if you'd allow me to come back on that, as the Chief Executive has made a point, all I'm saying is that at the moment the strategy we're approving commits us to funding capital projects in a particular way. It doesn't give us an option to borrow, because it sets out a sequential way of providing the funds, and borrowing is the last one of those. If you look at Appendix 2, page 5, it clearly sets out the 7 methods of funding capital projects, and it says that borrowing is the last of those. So at the moment we have no option but to use our reserves. All I'm saying is that there are some projects in the capital programme now, and solar arrays would be one of them. In fact, the Baker Road project would have been one of them, because if that produces a 7% return, then you could argue that would be better funded through borrowing. But that's been and gone now. But we have projects in the future programme which, as I said, are producing return. At the moment, we have no option, given the recommendations on the report, to use borrowing to fund them. So what I'm suggesting is that the next report at least examines the option for that, doesn't constrain us in the way that our current policy would do.
So can I just try to gain what you're trying to propose? The recommendation that's set there, but in the future reports that come back on the strategy, you wish that part to be looked at as maybe borrowing money. Is that the gist of what you're trying to put
yes,
in?
Yes, that's exactly it, Chair. Looking at the potential for funding projects through prudential borrowing, rather than being constrained by a schedule which says we won't do it basically until we run out of money.
Okay, so in sense, we're accepting the report here with the added bit that next time one comes, there might be that possibility, which I would have thought would be anyway. But would you?
Through you, Chair, just to confirm, the only way this can be an amendment, are you seeking, sorry, Councillor O'Brien, I must clarify the position, are you seeking an amendment to the written policy with that wording in? Because if it's just generally a request, we look at it, it's not really a valid amendment. If you're seeking to amend the policy, then it would be a valid amendment. And I will apologise, I didn't write as quickly to get the exact wording of your amendment, which we'll clarify in a second.
No, sorry, I apologise. I think you're overcomplicating it here. I'm not suggesting we amend the policy. I'm simply adding a recommendation which says that the next capital strategy report examines the potential for funding the capital programme through prudential borrowing.
Yeah, this is where I'm getting slightly confused, because an amendment has to be adding words or taking words away from the original motion. In effect, you're adding a completely new proposition. So if it's not amending the policy, I can't quite see how this is a valid amendment.
Chair, the recommendation is to approve the report. I'm simply saying we approve the report, but we add an amendment that, as I've just read out.
Is there a possibility that this can actually go through as on the recommendation and then take note, the 151 officer is taking note of what your point is, and then maybe that could be put in next time? Is that, Karen, you've obviously got something there in front of you. Go on.
I was just wondering if we could make a slight amendment to the Appendix 2, you know, to not be quite so stringent about the order of the financing. That be acceptable?
If it's amending the policy, then that, because an amendment must refer a matter to appropriate body for consideration, to leave out words and insert other words, or to insert or add words. And I can only see this as an adding a change to the policy, because your motion is to, you know, accept the strategy. So
I think what we could do is, instead of making prudential borrowing number 7, we could make it a separate item on its own, and say prudential borrowing will be used to fund, well, it stands alone actually, used to fund capital investment if the cost of the borrowing is affordable. So if you move item 7 from having to be number 7, sorry, 7 of the 7 there, have it a standalone item, and say prudential borrowing will be used in place of the above 6 financing sources. So insert those words. To fund the capital investment if the cost of borrowing is affordable. We could do that.
if that's acceptable to you, Councillor O'Brien, that amends the policy. So it'd be a case of amending the policy on those words.
I'm just going to bring in Mr. Wilson first.
Yeah, Chair, I was actually going to suggest there might be an easier way of dealing with this, because Councillor O'Brien said that he doesn't have an issue with approving the current policy, but when this comes back next time round, he would like different consideration to be given to the means of financing, which wouldn't be in a strict hierarchical order. So one way of dealing with this is to actually approve recommendation 1, but to have a second recommendation to say that when the corporate investment strategy for what will then be 23-24 is prepared, that consideration be given to the means of funding, which would include Prudential borrowing. I think that would deal with the issue that Councillor O'Brien is looking to address, but I'm sure he'll correct me if I'm wrong.
So it's future years. Councillor O'Brien, do you want to just make your point?
No, that's what I
Right, that's what
proposed.
you're quite happy.
Slightly different words.
Yeah. Okay. So we've gone around the houses. Okay. Councillor Salt, did you? Right. Okay. Thank you. Right. Councillor Slack.
Thank you, Chair. On page 57, the Council continued to bid for capital grants with the opportunity arises. With the developing economic situation where capital grants will be harder to get, isn't it a time that the Council look to introducing SIL, the Community Infrastructure Levy, to which will be a genuine fund to finance affordable housing and other infrastructure programmes. So just should we be looking again at introducing SIL, and like many councils have.
You want to come on to that, Mike? Although,
Chair, I'll deal with that one. Councillor Slack will recall that we have been down the route of looking at the introduction of SIL a few years ago.
Yeah.
And there is a sort of an extended process that we have to go through to demonstrate that if we do introduce SIL, it has no impact upon the viability of development. We got to the point, if you recall, previously where we had agreed that we would go down the route of SIL. We took some additional advice from consultants, and the consultants said at that particular point in time, the costs of development and the changes in the cost of development against the changes in the values of new development made it such that it wasn't appropriate for Derbyshire Dales to move forward with it. But the recommendation and resolution from Council at that time was also that if the circumstances arose that SIL did seem to become a viable option, then we would look at that again. At this moment in time, there's no evidence to suggest that it's still that position.
Just to come back, Mike, just to say that the changing economic situation may alter it in the next year or so, but something we shall be looking at next year. Yeah.
If the circumstances change and it's seen to be appropriate, then there is no reason why we can't do that. But at the moment, there is no indications from the advice we're getting that the circumstances have changed sufficiently to give us the headroom to be able to sort of go down the route of introducing SIL.
Thank you.
is this a question, Councillor Cruz? Sorry.
No, I was just following up on
Okay, I'm just going to go back to Councillor O'Brien. After everything that we've been considered, you, as Mr Wilson said, and how I perceive what you're saying, you agree with the strategy that is, but wish to put in a second recommendation on top of what's already there, that we accept what there is, but in the future we can look at the borrowing in a different light. Is that what you'd like to do? And if that's the case, does that find a seconder? Councillor Cruz. Okay. Does everybody understand that? I know it's a bit confusing, but I think it has been stated, and I think in Karen's report in some aspects, she has said there might be a time when we need to look into borrowing. So putting that in as a recommendation, as a second recommendation on top of this, I think is quite adamant. So anybody else wishing to make any more comments upon that?
Yeah, can we just confirm with Mr Wilson what the wording that he used so that we can make sure we're voting on the correct amendment?
Yes, thank you, Chair. My suggestion, having listened to the debate, is that there's a second recommendation to the effect that in proposing a revised capital strategy for 2023-24, consideration be given to the means and priority of financing used.
Is everybody understanding in that what's trying to be proposed?
So, Chair, you need to vote on the amendment.
We're going to, yeah. Councillor O'Brien and Councillor Cruz proposed this to add in the second recommendation in as stated by by Mr. Wilson, just. So can we have a vote, all in favour? A show of hands. Against? Six. Where is it? Abstentions? Okay. Then that's been, the amendment is put forward. So now we go back to the substantive amendment proposal of just the recommendation 1, which was proposed by Councillor Donnelly and seconded by Councillor Cruz. So we go to the vote on that now, please. All in favour of just having the recommendation to take the report without adding the second recommendation in?
Sorry, Chair, could we have the result of that first vote?
Chair, the vote was around 17 for, 5 against. Sorry, 6 against.
In that case, Chair, isn't it the procedure that then becomes a substantive recommendation?
Yes, it does.
And we don't...
So it's a substantive motion, now you're voting on the amendment and the first one.
Oh, sorry, beg me pardon. Beg me pardon. Yeah, we're all getting confused on this. Right, okay, so we are now not going back to the very beginning. So we're going to the one that we've just voted on, again, now being the substantive motion, we'll get it right eventually, of Councillor O'Brien and seconded by Paul Cruz as regards the recommendation 1 as stipulated on the report, with the second as regards maybe looking into things in the future policy. All in favour, please show. Against? 6. Abstentions? Then that's carried. Thank you. We've got there in the end. Can I ask you don't put any more amendments up, Mr. O'Brien? Or let me know prior. Be more helpful. Okay. Item 11, the Treasury Management Strategy Statement. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you. So clearly there's a link between the last report and this one, because the size of your capital programme and the need to borrow and so on impacts your Treasury activities. The SIPFA Code of Practice on Treasury Management requires the Council to approve a Treasury Management Strategy before the start of each year. At this Council, monitoring of that strategy is then carried out mid-year and at the end of the year by the Governance and Resources Committee. So the Council invests substantial amounts of money on the markets, and it's therefore exposed to financial risks, which could include the loss of invested funds and the revenue effect of changing interest rates. Now, at the moment, interest rates on borrowing are going up, so that will generate us more income, so it's favouring us at the moment. A Treasury Management Strategy is therefore essential to assist in the identification, monitoring and control of risks. And you'll see, if you read the strategy, it does things like mean that we don't put all our eggs in one basket, and that each basket has a limit to the amount that we'll put in it. It also means that we look at things like liquidity, so that we don't invest for fixed term and then can't get access to our money when we need it. With regard to the external context mentioned in the early parts of the report, there have been some changes in the last couple of weeks since I wrote the report. At its meeting on the 16th of March, the Monetary Policy Committee did increase interest rates again, bank rates, so they increased them from 0.5% to 0.75%, which we expected in the report. And our advisors are in close. Their view is that there'll be another increase to 1% in May. The report indicates inflation was expected to peak at 7.25% in April, but I saw reports this morning in the media that are now talking about inflation hitting 9% later this year. So that's a concern in terms of our revenue budget. But I'm asking members to approve this Treasury Management Strategy Statement and the Prudential Indicators for 22-23. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Questions? Then we'll move into debate. Councillor Donnelly.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. No comment. I'm quite happy to move this report.
Seconder? Councillor Atkin.
Yeah, I'm quite happy to second this, and as always, Karen, very good report.
Anybody else wishing to make any comments? No, I'll go to the vote. All in favour, please show. Unanimous? Against? Say it just for the sake. Abstentions? There. That was carried. Thank you. Turn back on. Item 12. Localism Act Pay Policy Statement. Paul.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. The Council does have a legal responsibility to publish annually a pay policy statement. This statement relates to the period 21-22. It is actually presented to members late because the annual pay settlement for local government employees was only agreed a matter of weeks ago. So the proposal is to approve the 21-22 statement, despite the fact that we are pretty much at the end of the financial year, but then to give authority to publish the 22-23 pay policy statement once the local government settlement for the 22-23 financial year is agreed, which is likely to be some considerable months away. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Questions? Good. And I will move to proposal. Councillor Finesse.
Yes, I will propose recommendations. Thank you, Chair.
I'll second, Chair.
Councillor Donnelly, you're seconding. Thank you. Anybody else wishing to make any more comments upon this? Councillor Allison.
Thank you, Chair. I did go back to Deborah about some further information on this report relating to the number of employees and the gender split above grade 14, because I was really pleased to see the press release about celebrating International Women's Day and the gender split of management grades above grade 10. But I was interested to see what the gender split was above grade 14, and it's very low. So there are 6 employees in the organisation who are male above grade 14 and only 1 female. And it's just a general comment really to say that there is obviously some sort of glass ceiling above that level in the organisation. And it will be good, considering there's some recruitment coming up, that maybe that might be broken a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul, do you want to comment on that?
Well,
sorry, that was a comment.
Oh,
I'm entering into a debate about it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's fine. Okay, then fine. Councillor Ratcliffe.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make a very straightforward comment to the effect that it's not just pay policies that, of course, that we need to be reviewing every so often, but also the conditions and working environment within the management structure. We've spoken about this many times. I know that my colleague over this side of the House, as it were, Steve Flitter, has mentioned it on any number of occasions about being aware of that. So I mean, just to put that on record, as it were, not just about pay, it's about how we treat the senior officers and make the job as not easy as possible. We don't want to give them a too easy time, obviously, but I see Tim smiling. But that we facilitate the best outcomes for this council.
Thank you, Councillor Ash. Councillor Slack.
Thank you, Chair. We're just experiencing now probably the worst standard of living decline since the 1950s. We're going to see inflation roaring ahead, and people are going to be left behind. I think we should be very, very careful what we're doing now and monitor pay levels. We don't want our employees to fall behind and add to the desperate situation the country's in at the moment. I've never, in my lifetime, I've never seen it in such a bad state economy with roaring inflation and standard of living falling so rapidly. It's unbelievable. So I think we've got to keep this in perspective and address this situation if we see it getting worse. Chair.
Thank you. Anybody else wishing to make any more comments? With that, it has been proposed, the recommendation set out before you, recommendation 1, as taking the annual policy and approve it for 21-22, and then obviously for 22-23 to be settled as and when that comes forward. All in favour? Against? Abstentions? And that's carried. Thank you. Item 13, Vision Derbyshire Climate Change Strategy 22-25. Tim, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Councillor Ratcliffe commented about me smiling, and I think that in part was because I knew I was up next. The report before you is asking you to approve a strategy for working together across Derbyshire in relation to climate change. In particular, the strategy looks at community emissions rather than the council's own emissions. We have our own strategy that looks at how we deal with our own carbon footprint from our own operations. This is more about how councils can work together across the piece to help individuals, businesses, households, travel, transport, or reduce their emissions around the district. It's badged up as a Vision Derbyshire project because it's being held under that banner, but in reality, I imagine members know that officers do work together on all kinds of things across the district, whether that be planning or environmental health or finance or economic development. In this particular case, climate change was one of a couple of areas that was identified by the Vision Derbyshire project to be badged up under that banner to encourage councils to work together. What this does is it introduces quite a high-level strategy, a series of headlines, if you like, of the kind of areas that councils think they can work together on to add value to the work of individual councils. And in particular, and I've got to remember these as I go forward now, they're looking at strengthening the low-carbon economy, decarbonising housing. As you know, we have quite an effective programme of works on that already. We're better than some councils in the area and on a par with others, you know, and we want to share that experience and make sure that we can help as many people around Derbyshire as possible whilst reducing carbon emissions. It looks at sustainable transport, travel and infrastructure and waste and resources. And obviously I know waste and resources is an issue that members are very interested in at the moment. These are headlines within a strategy. They're not backed up at this stage by a detailed action plan, and the group recognises that's something it needs to move on to. And those actions will be brought to the attention of members as we go forward with that. But in particular, what this report looks to do is to ask you to consider and hopefully approve this strategy ahead of it being approved by the Vision Derbyshire mechanism itself, by the Joint Committee of Vision Derbyshire. The idea is that each individual member gets the opportunity to look at the strategy and comment upon it and hopefully approve it before that goes forward. In wrapping this all up, I will say that the strategy has been seen at a couple of points by the Climate Change Working Group, and any comments that the group have made have been fed back into the Vision Derbyshire group to enable them to amend the strategy. Some of those comments have been acted upon in informing this.
Thank you. Councillor Slack.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I do agree with you, Tim. Vision Derbyshire, some of the policies aren't very good, but this is good. This is good where we're working on climate change together, and I fully support this, and I'd like to move it straight away, Chair. I think it's a good scheme, and it'll only improve climate change emergency.
Did I take it that you would like to move it?
Pardon?
Did I take it that you like to move this?
Move it, Chair, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, that is taken. Does that find a seconder before we move to question, carrying on. Councillor Buttle. That nicely brings you in, Councillor Buttle, if you'd like to make some comment.
Yeah, thank you very much. I really welcome this. I think it's absolutely great. There's lots of buzzwords, and I'm really hoping that they actually turn into reality, because we've just got so many great things in there. It's really, really good. There's one thing that really caught my eye, which was page 111, section 6, bullet point 4. You know, like, exciting stuff. Adopting practices in farming which will improve soil sequestration. You know, that is the sort of thing where we could end up being carbon negative in Derbyshire. Just really quite exciting stuff. Just one little line that's in there. There's so much stuff there that we could make a real difference with. And I'm a massive fan of joined up government as well. So if it all comes together, then I really do welcome it. And I'm very happy to second it. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Peter O'Brien, Councillor O'Brien, sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Ball, Chair. I'll combine my question and comment. So my question is relates to section 3 of the strategy, and I think it goes to the heart of the relationship between Vision Derbyshire and the local authorities. Section 3 says a range of activities and strategies will be identified and delivered collaboratively by the councils between 2022 and 2025. So my question is, how is it intended that members of this council will be engaged in that process of defining those actions? That's my question. My points are that it's very unfortunate that the Peak District National Park is not party to this strategy. And I think that means when you look at the headlines that unfortunately for a third of the district, we aren't going to be able to deliver these wonderful ambitions. So I don't know why the park are not involved, but I do hope that those in power will make it clear that, well, will do their best to address that, because I think we can celebrate it, but unfortunately it means a third of the district is not going to be able to benefit from the ambitions in this strategy. The other point I want to make is on section 7, which is about communication and engagement, and there's a laudable objective here to give all individuals and groups the opportunity to shape how this challenge is addressed. But what's missing from this whole strategy is any public involvement. And that's again is an issue with Vision Derbyshire type documents. They're produced, they're agreed by councils, but there is no semblance of any public engagement. And I'd be interested to hear views on other colleagues of that. As we pride ourselves on engaging with the public, and this strategy says that we will give individuals the opportunity to shape the strategy, but we don't see it necessary to consult with them on the strategy itself. I find this a very strange approach to working collaboratively. But I would appreciate an answer to the question on how it's intended that members of this council will be engaged on identifying the actions we're actually going to take over the next 3 years.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I made a note of that. I think I got it down. In the first instance here, we have the Climate Change Working Group, and it would be I'm the representative who sits on this group on behalf of this council. It would be my intention to bring action plans and project plans back through the Climate Change Working Group for discussion and comment. Some of those will be, well, none of them will be minor, but some of those will be fairly straightforward. Others may very well require approval. I would suggest formal approval at Council or Community and Environment Committee, in which case we'll bring those forward. But the first protocol will be the Climate Change Working Group.
Thank you. Councillor Archer, question?
Thank you, Chair. Sort of a comment on the question. Really welcome this. So anything that's going to raise the profile of climate change, make it a higher priority, has got to be a good thing. I know we're not yet at the point of detail on how it's going to actually impact in real terms, but I wonder if there's any sort of idea about how it might work in real terms. Maybe we can look at a case study, such as the air quality issue in Ashbourne at the moment, which is, I'm not convinced the current plans are going to have an impact on that. And how would we potentially see this new development, this new policy, working in practice to try and address that and make sure that practical measures to address the issues of air quality in Buxton Hill area of Ashbourne are actually brought forward? Can we see how that might work yet? If not, can we make it a sort of case study that we can look into it and maybe let us know the sort of things that this group can do to try and take that forward in a bit more practical way?
I can come back on that a little bit. One of the areas of work that we're looking at, I'll come back to the point about the air quality management area, but one of the areas we're looking at is decarbonisation of housing. And there is an intention to produce a series of case studies, and at the moment a subgroup of this group, so a couple of councils, we are one of them, are working with each other to try and look at a way we can be more, we can bring in even more funding, and we can not only help fund those that qualify for it, but we can provide a kind of one-stop shop for those that don't qualify for that funding, but nevertheless will benefit from the advice and expertise that's been built up so far. That work's ongoing, and when we get there, that will be published. So we'll make that available. In relation to air quality, the air quality management area in Ashbourne is not declared specifically in relation to climate change issues. So I always feel I need to make this point. It's a health-related issue, and that's why that area was declared. However, the cause of that pollution in that area is clearly road traffic, which does have an impact on climate change, and it's one of the areas included in here in relation to transport, travel and infrastructure. Certainly I'll ask for that to be considered along with the other air quality management areas that exist in Derbyshire.
Thank you for that. Councillor Finesse, question?
No, it's not a question, Chair. It's just a response to Councillor O'Brien's statement about Big Park. Is that okay? Yeah. The Vision Derbyshire, as I understand it, is just for local councils. Big Park hasn't been invited to join. But we do have our own strategy. And we have a panel, of which I'm a member, which regularly discusses climate change and how it can be affected. So I think it's a bit unfair to sort of blame people for not being part of this, because they have not been invited. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Ratcliffe, question, comments?
Yes, a question,
thank you.
Chair, and thank you for bringing me in. I'm very taken with the number of questions that residents put in this evening that I have, that I acknowledge have some place in the debate and questioning on this particular agenda item. Tim is a very hard-working officer who I'm sure we couldn't put this into better hands, and I'm sure it will have good outcomes in achieving the end result that we all want from that motion that we adopted on climate emergency a number of years ago now. However, I'd like to ask this question of Tim, if I may. Given some of those questions, the content of them, and the item that we're going to be considering in a moment or two, does he not feel that there is very much a growing apprehension that our climate change strategies are going to be undermined by what is taking place within the local plan in terms of housing numbers? Housing numbers, to my mind, that are being put forward without sufficient robust policies to see that they conform and contribute to climate change. I would have thought it would have been taken within the context of this climate change strategy that all new houses should be net zero, that we should accelerate retrofitting, that we should adopt low carbon heating where possible, and we should adopt micro energy generation on homes where that is available. Given that, I don't see the policies within our planning framework that are really pushing that forward. So I have the same apprehensions as those questioners that sent in their comments this evening, and really, I think, have received responses that I don't think are sufficient in detail, and I don't think are really addressing their concerns. I'll make that comment, I think, because I think it's justified. But I'd like to hear what Tim has to say, because I know you'll give me a very reasoned answer.
Thank you, Chair. Well, another of the very hard-working officers of the Council is, of course, Mike Hayes, who will be speaking shortly, and he knew I was going to say something like that. Yeah. In addition to the climate change working group on which I sit, part of Vision Derbyshire, there's another group looking at planning and climate change, which Mike represents us on, and that is looking at how planning policies can be maximised and the local plan can be maximised to help tackle the climate change issues. I don't know, Mike, whether you want to say anything at this point.
Tim's right, Councillor Ratcliffe. You know, I do sit on a planning and climate change working group, which is mainly made up of officers, and we've been looking at sort of how we can develop best practice and policy for sort of taking forward interlocal plans across the Derbyshire area that's covered by Vision Derbyshire. That work is still ongoing at the moment, so we're not really at that position yet where we can say to members here or members at other authorities that we've got that particular position cracked yet in terms of our policy approach. In terms of the responses we've given to members of the public in the report, in the sort of public participation section earlier in the agenda, you know, we are as officers fully committed to making sure that we can deliver on your aspirations as members representing the local community in terms of the mitigation measures that we need to put in place through the policies in the local plan for delivering on climate change. Those will come forward in due course. We're just not at that position yet to be able to sort of say to you what those are at this moment in time.
I thank you for the answer, Mike, and I do appreciate that things develop through conversation and things like this, and the questions and debate that we engage in. But I'll just remind you, and I'm sure you don't need reminding, that I sent you what I thought was a very, very pertinent SPD document that shows that authorities do have the powers, if they'll accept them, of almost mandating that these actions are taken. You know, you're not leaving it to the developers to make their minds up about this. You're saying to them, this is what we want. And generally speaking, it has been found that the developers will follow on this. They maybe will up their market prices, but the public will accept that because they know they're not going to have to make those investments at a later date. They're getting the package, if you like, at the beginning. So I'm still a committed advocate of this sort of a move. But I know you're listening, Mike, and that's all I ask.
Councillor Ratcliffe, yes, I am listening, and I have read through that document that you sent through and other documents other members have sent through. And all of those will be put into the mix in terms of the way in which we develop the policies to be taken forward into the local plan. And if you recall, what I have also said to members of the particularly local plan working group is that we need to make sure that the policies that we bring forward in the local plan are appropriate to Derbyshire Dales, and they're not necessarily ones that we bring in wholesale from elsewhere, which is completely inappropriate for our particular circumstances.
Thank you for that. Councillor Gamble, comment, question?
I actually had a couple of questions, but one of them I think at least has been answered. Just as a follow-up on Councillor O'Brien's point about the engagement, at what point in Vision Derbyshire are other people, other than just direct councillors and officers, going to be engaged? I'm just thinking the point Councillor Buttle made about sequestration of farmland. Have they started talking to representatives from the farming community, for example, on that yet?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, in relation to community engagement, I agree with your comment, actually, Councillor Gamble and Councillor O'Brien. It is something we need to be better at. From our own point of view, you all know Joe Hill, who's working with us on this. Joe's making a lot of effort to try and get out and about around the community. You might be aware of some of the work she's done in relation to the local markets with the Fantastic Homes exhibition. We've also engaged March's Energy Agency to do some active community engagement on our behalf to find out what people do want. That work's ongoing. In relation to the farming community, it's a very pertinent question because Councillor Purdy did, in fact, ask Joe and I to take part in a debate with various representatives at the Agricultural Business Centre in the very near future. I don't think we've got a date for that yet, but that could very well be the start of a conversation. It's also an area that we'd welcome further conversation with the Peak Park on, I think. Obviously, it's a key partner in respect of that particular issue. As regards Vision Derbyshire's own community engagement, that's something that we haven't covered in discussions yet, but I'll certainly take back into the group.
Hopefully, there'll be a two-way process with asking people what it is they want. I think the worst thing you can do in these situations sometimes is just, sit somewhere and decide what should happen to people and then tell them what should happen. I'm hoping this is going to be a two-way process.
Certainly, that's the way we're doing it ourselves at the moment, very much trying to find out what people would like and seeing what it is we can deliver against. Some of the things people would like, we as a council probably can't deliver against, but some we can.
And do you intend to ask Peak Park to be part of this? Because obviously they are a major local authority.
It's not in my or our gift individually to invite Peak Park to this particular table with the Vision Derbyshire group. However, we will, as a council, we will certainly talk to them, and we do talk to them about climate change issues. Another area Mike's involved in is looking at their policy development in that. Joe's been involved in that as well. So we do engage with them wherever we can.
Thank you. Councillor Bright.
Thank you, Chair. It's really, I just felt compelled to raise a counterpoint to Councillor Ratcliffe's very good points, but I have to sort of say that I hope I'm not speaking out of term here, but the majority of the councillors in this room, maybe not all, but certainly I don't include myself in this, might own their own homes, might have the luxury of owning their own homes. There's a lot of people who can't afford to buy homes in Derbyshire Dales, and we need to be mindful that we strike a balance. If we make properties far too expensive, young people won't be able to get on the housing ladder. And whilst I agree there is a balance that we have to make with, putting forward good, sound environmental policies, but we also need to be mindful that the Derbyshire Dales is a unique place. It is more expensive to build housing here, and we have to be mindful that we don't price the young. And I have to include myself in this. I'm 46 and I can't afford a home in Derbyshire Dales. I live in rented. And I know there's a heck of a lot of people out there who are in that similar situation. So we just need to be mindful of that. So all it was a counterpoint to your good points, Councillor Ratcliffe. I agree with you, but we just need to be mindful of that. Sorry to...
Thank you. Okay, we are on Vision Derbyshire's climate. Councillor Slack, you did propose it, and I'm going to let you come back and have your final words. Thank you.
Right. On moving this, I was under the impression that this was bringing Vision Derbyshire into it, but now Councillor Ratcliffe has, where I've already said previously that our local plan isn't sufficient, that our local plan is very weak and we should have more renewable energy. I've said that previous, but I was under the impression that this wasn't a part of that.
No, it isn't. I think we got off the beaten track.
I think our local plan's too weak. And
item 14 is more about the local plan.
Yeah.
Councillor Burford, I see that you had...
correct in moving it then.
Yes, that's absolutely fine. Thank you, Councillor Slack.
Thank you.
If we're in debate or questions now, but
Right, I'll make it clear now. We're going into debate.
well, yeah,
Thank you.
I'll make my question part of the debate in that case. Then. First of all, which is a question actually, I would like to echo what Councillor Wayne said at the start of the meeting about all these questions we've received tonight, both from members, including himself, and several residents. We've got about 8 sides of questions and answers here. We can't possibly do them justice in the short time that we've had, really. I mean, we could have done with them a few days ago. Can this be looked into by officers so that perhaps we can deal with this in a more efficient way in future? Because there's very pertinent points made both on climate change and on particularly the local plan, of course. So in terms of climate change, just going through the recommendations, it's a very laudable report, certainly, and the aims and objectives are certainly something that most people are going to support. On page 108, 5.3, it's been mentioned by other members, decarbonising Derbyshire's housing. Yes, there's a very laudable vision there, but the local plan obviously needs to, as Mike has told us, need to look at planning policies and how they can be, some of them perhaps made mandatory, but I take Councillor Bright's point about affordability, but I think you've got to look at economies of scale. I think if every new development or every developer building new houses was forced to make houses as carbon neutral as possible with full range of renewables, I'm sure the extra cost of that would be fairly minimal if it was done throughout Derbyshire Dales, throughout Derbyshire County, because of economies of scale, make them far more competitive. So that's something that I strongly recommend that we look at in probably the local plan working party and other Vision Derbyshire looks at this as well throughout the county, because we need to act probably in concert with neighbouring authorities if possible. But another thing that occurs to me is, and it's something for the county council, I should have asked Sue about this, she could have perhaps pursued it through the county council, but I think I'm conscious of the fact that the county council seems to be replacing all the old street lighting with LED lighting, but it seems to be, certainly where we live, it seems to be about 1 in 4 that's replaced, and probably because of financial constraints, they can't do them all. But I think they've got to do the whole of the county must be surely replaced with LED lighting as soon as possible. But just an aside, really, it's a bit ironic that both Sainsbury's in Matlock keep the lights on all night and more or less illuminates the sky above Matlock. And the bus station waiting room, which we own, has the lights on every night, and it's been closed for about 2 years, so that's another thought. I think something should be done about that. It can't be beyond the wit of man to turn lights off that are left on all night in a council property. So, in other words, I think all new houses should be net zero as far as possible through planning policy and guidance in the future. 5.4, page 109, sustainable transport, and something that Councillor Archer has mentioned, air quality improvement. That's got to be a priority, I think, and shift obviously to electric vehicles will improve that. And we need to provide more charging points, as I've said before. The charging point infrastructure is inadequate at the moment, up and down the country, not just in the Dales. So we've got to increase, obviously, the modal share of active transport, as it says in this document, walking and cycling, but that's okay in the southern parts of the Dales and southern parts of the county where you haven't got the topography we've got here in Derbyshire Dales. But it all hinges on reducing car use by removing unsustainable residential development and incentivising sustainable travel. So we've got to be careful we don't just use rhetoric on this and popular sound bites that we hear up and down the country. It's got to be something that's practical in our fairly diverse landscape and topography. Page 110, 5.5, waste and resources. I think the priority there is to, as we must agree, to reduce the amount of household and commercial waste that's going to landfill and divert it from that and increase recycling and reuse of waste. So we need, again, collaboration with neighbouring authorities to make sure that happens. Green and food waste, that's been obviously discussed a few times recently in this council. So the processing of it needs to be improved. So we need solutions for that, obviously in discussion with neighbouring authorities as well. Page 111, section 6, carbon offsetting and sequestration. Yes, I agree with that entirely. And it does say in the report, especially trees, woodlands and vegetation, which absorbed in 2019 apparently 0.13 million tonnes of CO2 out of 7.2 million tonnes annual emissions across the county. So we must surely increase tree cover, and because we're going to lose so many trees through ash dieback in the near future that we will be running fast to stand still in terms of tree planting in this county, or in this district, particularly this part of the county. So, and it also mentioned increasing green spaces and tree coverage in towns. Well, you know, to be honest, I've not seen many trees planted in any towns in this district for many years now. Part of the town centre scheme in Matlock included about half a dozen trees, but apart from that, I've not seen any new trees planted in Matlock, apart from what have been planted by, well, certainly Matlock Town Council in the past and individuals who have campaigned for them. So that's something else we've got to look at very seriously, I think. Councils are working to develop a natural capital and biodiversity strategy, but, you know, as my wife would say, we seem to have an excess of strategies on all councils at the moment, and there's just a lack of practical action. I think we've got to come up with practical ideas and solutions. Okay, thanks.
Thank you for that. Very complex. It has been proposed and seconded on the Vision Derbyshire Climate Change Strategy. Anybody else wishing to make any more comments? Then I'm going to the vote. All in favour, please show. Unanimous? That's unanimous. Thank you very much for that. Item 14, Derbyshire Dales Local Plan. Next steps. Thank you. Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to remind members that the meeting of council that we held on the 19th of January resolved to excuse me, to complete the review of the local plan. But the resolution also said that we would be looking at the more detailed aspects of the sort of schedule of changes that we needed to make to the plan, following on from that resolution. And essentially what we've got before you this evening is the first part of that process, where we're looking at, in a little bit more detail, the sort of issues that are around housing needs and housing supply for the period up to 2040. One of the things I need to sort of make clear in opening really is that the report doesn't make any recommendations about what the future housing levels should be at this moment in time, nor does it make any recommendations about what sites should be allocated within the local plan. That is something that will come through the local plan working group and back to council in the future. So we're not here to debate the merits, if you like, of the sites or the merits of the numbers. It's around the process that we've gone through so far and the next steps we need to take the local plan forward. The report sort of sets out, as you can see in it, that we've looked at the evidence in relation to housing need and in the future, and there's 4 potential scenarios that have been identified by the consultants that have been working for us on that. We've also been looking at the housing supply side of it through the call for sites process and the strategic housing land availability assessment work that's gone on in parallel to that. Bringing those two, the report seeks to try and bring those two aspects together, and tries to sort of give members a picture of where we are at this moment in time in terms of the assessment work that we've done behind the scenes in looking at whether or not the actual supply side of what's been coming forward can actually meet those aspirations that we've got through the corporate plan and through our economic plan and also through our COVID recovery plan in terms of the sort of levels of growth that we've identified in the sort of scenarios we've got on housing need. And as you can see in the report, what we've got to the conclusions is that essentially we are able to potentially get to a point with the level of supply that's been coming forward to meet the standard methodology. The standard methodology is the very minimum that the government would like us to achieve. The local plan working group and officers are of the view that the standard methodology and the baseline growth scenarios aren't necessarily those scenarios that match the aspirations which we've set out for ourselves through the corporate plan and through the economic development plan and our COVID recovery plan. And as a result of that, we are
recommending to you this evening that actually we need to do some more work to try and look at developing future options that sees whether or not actually there is the potential to get closer to those high levels of growth that we've identified in the report. I'm not going to say to you tonight that is going to happen. We're going to be able to achieve that. That's something we want to investigate over the course of the next 12 months or so, by looking at, appointing some consultants to help us out in doing that particular piece of work. The consequence of the piece of work that we're asking members to sign off tonight would be to delay the preparation of the sort of consultation, or the first page of consultation on the plan, and the subsequent then processes we'd need to go through to get the plan on the books and replace the adopted plan we've got at the moment. If you recall, the actual my laptop is beginning to freeze, but the report we initially presented to members at council back in November 2020 saw the potential adoption of the plan somewhere in the middle of next year. We're now anticipating that will be then possibly shifted back down to the back end of 2024, the year after. This gives us enough time then to really give a really good detailed consideration of what options are available to us going forward. There are a couple of points I just want to raise in relation to the details of the report before I sort of happily answer any questions. Firstly is in relation to a site that's included within the schedule in the appendices, and that's the site at Northwood Recreation Ground. It's a site which has been made aware to us as officers that has been looked at as a potential sort of wildflower meadow as part of the biodiversity project, at the same time as being identified as a potential housing site. Given that a lot of work has been invested so far on the development of the sort of wildflower meadow side of things, and the expectation is with the local community that's likely to take place in the very near future, any development that would come forward on that site, which is anticipated to probably be about 20 units, is likely to actually undermine any initial work on that. What we're suggesting is that probably we need to go back to the Estates Department and discuss with them the withdrawal of that site from this particular schedule, so that then we don't end up in a situation where our work and the reputation of the District Council and the work we've done on that side of things in terms of the wildflower meadow is undermined. The second bit I'd want to point out is in paragraph 3.13, we've identified that the detailed assessment will be published and made available to members on the members portal and on the website. We too as officers have been affected by COVID. We've had a couple of technological issues with the system we've been using on, so we haven't yet been in a position to publish those detailed assessments, and we're now anticipating we'll be able to do that before Easter. It doesn't change our position in relation to the assessment work that we've done so far. All it is doing is basically putting all of the assessment work that we've done into one document and making that public available and therefore available for members of the public and members to look at going forward. I don't think there's any more I need to add on this report, and I'm happy to answer any particular questions members might have.
Thank you for that. Councillor Burford, please, question. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I've got 3 questions, I think. In terms of option 5 approach, I think in the report, Mike has got allocated housing land and considering a new village, and saying that the comment is that this would delay the revised local plan preparation by 9 to 12 months. But at the same time, if you look at the original timetable for the local plan preparation, I think we're going to have the draft available next month. And now it's been put forward by a year anyway to May 23 up to towards the end of 2024. So in view of that change, and that's called a milestone, by the way, not a timetable for some reason, but in view of that, can I ask why it's going to delay it by that much, and why is that a serious matter in view of the fact that the timetable has been extended anyway?
Chair, I think it's just a matter of the practicalities of being able to get to the point where we've appointed consultants, and the consultants have been able to undertake a detailed assessment of what options might be available to us, looking at and identifying whether there are additional areas of land that we haven't been made aware of so far, and being able to do a thorough analysis of those sites, so that we can get to a point where we can determine whether or not we can deliver on any of those other scenarios that we've identified to us going forward. It's just really a matter of saying how long will it take us to do that piece of work based upon our experience of commissioning consultants, getting the work done, and then getting them to report back, and then reporting it back to members. So it's really just the practicalities of that.
Well, the second question is, I'm wondering, in view of especially what Karen's told us tonight about anticipated 9% inflation later this year, what difference do you think do officers think will the present unprecedented level of inflation make in terms of housing demand? It's going to be obviously exacerbated by the appalling impact of the Russian invasion of Ukraine as well, of course. And the only thing I can think of, the only impact I can think of, is that so many families are going to be desperate for, well, obviously with the energy price increases as well, are so desperate for housing, or moving from, perhaps downsizing from a 4-bedroom house to a 2-bedroom house, whatever it might be, that the demand is going to be for more affordable properties, not less. And so we surely must be looking at developments or mandating developments of smaller properties to try to help these hard-pressed families.
Yeah, Chair, the point that Councillor Burfoot is making is around demand for housing, and what Councillor Burfoot is referring to is, in essence, is the operation of the housing market. What I have said in this chamber and elsewhere is that the local plan is about meeting needs going forward. That is different to the operation of the housing market. And the operation of the housing market is dictated by supply and demand, costs and values. The fact is that as a planning authority, we need to be addressing what our future needs are. The operation of the market will adjust itself over a period of time. It will have an impact upon the delivery of housing over time, but essentially it is the need aspect that we need to be focusing on. The market will adjust itself over time. If the house builders can't sell the houses at the prices they think they want to sell them at, then they will have to adjust their prices to sell them. And that's the fundamental difference between what we've got to do in the local plan and what will happen on the ground.
Thank you. The third question, last question, is, you'd be pleased to know, the national park effect. I think we dwell too much on trying to get the national park to allow more housing. I think even if they double the numbers, it won't make that much difference to our demands outside the national park. So can we lobby, and I note, in fact, to look very briefly at what how Michael replied to, I think, John Ewart's question about the South Downs National Park, but can we lobby our MP to join the Conservative MP for Hampshire East, that's Sir Damien Hines, who is campaigning against the housing demands of the government, despite about 57% of his, with his constituency or district, I'm not sure, district presumably, being out in the South Downs National Park. Obviously, it's something which is we've been talking about for several years now, but we don't seem to get any consistent response from the government. Even the letter from the minister, was it Mr. Pincham, I think, to the leader, that doesn't seem to explain much, certainly in terms of consistency, as far as I can see.
Chair, as officers, we will continue to try and lobby the national park to try and encourage them to facilitate more development within the national park. We have a need to enter into a dialogue with them as a formal dialogue through the duty to cooperate and agree a position with them. At this moment in time, the indications are that that position isn't going to necessarily change significantly, and it would need a significant policy change at national level to encourage the national park to change their approach. But you know, we can continue to have that dialogue. We continue to push and pressure them
through whatever means. And that could well be, you know, discussions between members, as we've already had. It could also be at an officer level, and it can also be at a sort of a high level, political level. But as you'll see from the letter that Councillor Purdy's had back from, you know, Mr. Pincher, the inference from government is essentially that they see that valued landscapes have a significant role to play in terms of the influence that they play on the delivery of housing. So, you know, I think to be honest, we are fighting an uphill battle in trying to persuade them to deliver significant amounts. And what you said is quite right. Even if we went from, say, 20 units a year to 40 units a year, that wouldn't make a significant dent in terms of our sort of needs elsewhere within the district.
So we've just come back briefly. So therefore, shouldn't we be concentrating on the actual numbers that are demanded of this district and other districts like Hampshire East, rather than trying to get the National Park to build 10 times more houses than they're building at the moment?
The fundamental sort of principle that we you know, in terms of the approach that's been taken is that the way in which the housing numbers are sort of calculated is on a district-wide basis, and that is very, very difficult to be able to disaggregate down between the local planning authority area and the national park area. And to do that would involve some very complicated calculations, and there's no guarantee that those would be wholly accurate. There has been work done in the past, but it really hasn't stood much of a test in terms of, you know, the ability to say actually that's a right proportion in the park and that proportion outside the park.
Thank you. Councillor Wade, question?
Thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, I've got 3 questions because it's something that I think is very important. So if you'll bear with me, please, I'll be as quickly as I can. Derbyshire Dales residents within the local plan area, at least, recognise that higher levels of development over the last 3 years have caused significant increases in flooding, human waste flowing into our streets, and even more congested roads and poorer air quality. They are the people who live and work in these areas. They're the people who they know what they want from these areas in which we live, and the work they should be consulted at the earliest possible stage, in my opinion. I do feel strongly, with some of the wording in the report, that we've discussed tonight about consultation and how important it is. We mustn't lose sight that we are working on behalf of our communities, and it is paramount that we act in the best interests of our communities. And even Mr. Pincher, in his letter, that it comes up shortly, he says councils and their committees are best placed to take decisions on local plans, right? But we choose, and I don't know why, but we're choosing to delay consultation with members of our community till October 2023, as I read the report. Now, what is the point of consulting with the public at the end of the process when all the decisions and objectives have been set, possibly? And why can't recommendations 4 and 5 be run in tandem, thereby enabling our communities to have their say and be given the earliest opportunity to take part in the decision? They will feel more valued and have ownership of the decision. So why can't, because I would possibly like to put forward an amendment to this that we do include the consultation. So basically we would have 4.13, 4.14, 4.15 and 4.16. So basically we'd go with what the recommendation is, but we'd add consultation, because we've got a long time to consult, and I think we need to do that. So can Mr. Hayes advise me why we can't consult with the public now, please? Thank you. That's the first question.
Chair, it's a valid question that Councillor Wayne has asked, and it's for that reason that it's an option within the report. But you know, the experience that we have of undertaking public consultation is one that, you know, is one that we
we need to think very carefully about what it is that we want to get out of the public consultation. And if we undertake public consultation in the wrong way, then actually the public consultation that we undertake has got no value in terms of the whole process itself. And there is a danger if we go into a process of saying, okay, we've got all of these options, we've got all these things that are in the evidence base so far, which direction you want to go in, we'll end up in a situation where we'll be probably, end up with the lowest common denominator in terms of the housing numbers, because that's what we've had in terms of the consultation exercise. And that doesn't necessarily correspond with the aspirations of the district council. So the situation is in my mind, as an officer making recommendations to you, there needs to be some value in that terms of shaping the direction of what we're going in. And I'm not sure we're going to get anything out of it if we go to members of the public and say, option 1, 2, 3, and 4 are ones we want to consult on, because they'll go to option 1, the lowest common denominator, and that isn't necessarily what is our aspirations as an authority. If the authority wants to change its aspirations, then that is obviously something we can give some consideration to. But at the moment, that's not something that I'm thinking we need to be doing. We need to be looking at what is appropriate for Derbyshire Dales to go forward, and that is taking a growth option that is going to deliver a more sustainable community than we've got going forward. If we have, within the options that we've had identified to us, if we maintain option 1, the minimum amount, essentially what we don't do is we don't grow the economy. The economy stays fairly stagnant. We get ageing population, and we don't get any particular growth going forward. If we move up to the higher levels of growth, the medium levels of growth, we get more of the sort of economically active members of the public coming into the district. We get much more buoyant and much more sustainable economy. And I think that's what this authority needs to be looking at. We don't want to be necessarily being in a position where we are replicating what happens within the national park and the approach that's taken in the national park. So my sort of simple answer to it is I don't think there's going to be much value in the responses we get from the public consultation, because they will just not give us anything to sort of drive us forward in terms of a mandate going in the future.
Thank you. I'll just come back on that one before I ask my next question, if that's okay with you, Chair. We don't want to be taking the Derbyshire Dales residents for fools. They can make a considered decision, and we're a professional body, and we should be putting forward a consultation that explains the pitfalls and the benefits all the way through. That's my opinion of it. And if there's no legal or other reason why, I would like to put forward a motion that we do go for consultation, as well as the option that Mr. Hayes has gone and recommended. And councillors can vote on it, councillors can vote on it if they so wish, but I think we as an organisation will be respected more if we take the public with us, and it then is part of their actual decision as well. And I think people know that there is a big difference between the area outside the Peak Park and within the Peak Park, and I think we should bear that in mind. So that was my first question. The second one is at point 419, Mr. Hayes states that the experience indicates that a number of potential sites allocated within the local plan, there are deliverability issues. I presume one of those, and is the Gritston Road site, which is a problematic site and is still yet to be determined after 3.5 years of deliberation. What I want to know is what additional and more comprehensive assessments are being undertaken to ensure this site is deliverable, therefore taking account of the concerns raised and the fact that the national planning guidance has been updated. I know it's within the document that you've gone and forwarded to us, which is in front of us tonight, but I want to know there are serious issues identified with that site, and I want to know what we as a council are going to do, if we wish to retain it in the local plan, what we are going to do to ensure that all those issues are remedied. Thank you.
In terms of the report, the point at 4.19 is around the fact that there are different parameters that we've set in the report for flexibility. And Councillor Raine is right. There are sites, and it's not just Gritstone Road. There are other sites where the original trajectory that we put in the adopted local plan hasn't been achieved. But nevertheless, we are continuing to work with those landowners and those developers to try and ensure that we understand where they are with the development of those sites. We're also working with people like Homes England to try and encourage them to release finance to help underwrite those sites and bring those sites forward. I think it would be wrong for me to make a particular comment on the Gritstone Road site, given the three issues are subject to a plan, or three issues that he's raised are part of the planning application process, and I think those are ones that need to be considered by the planning committee rather than necessarily this particular meeting this evening. Other than that, the issue in the report is around making sure that we have got the right level of flexibility in our calculations, and that's where we're suggesting we need to be conservative about that.
If I can just come back on the second question, I think what I'm wanting out of it all, what I'm wanting out of the new local plan, is that when we're assessing these sites at an early stage, we need to ensure that all the statutory consultees are exercising due diligence and actually visiting the sites and assessing them. Because what I've personally found is that there have been loopholes, there have been pitfalls in these things, and I just want to know that there will be a robust, I'm sure there will be after this, but there is a robust actual improvement in the investigation at the early stage, so we're not letting things fester over 3.5 years.
I can assure Councillor Waine that those agencies that may well have not necessarily provided the level of detail previously have made significant changes to their approach in terms of their assessment of sites at this stage so far.
Thank you very much. The last one, it's a quickie. I note from Mr. Yowett's question, the response says that the South Downs Park has now got its own local plan. But I'm not too fussed about what the South Downs local plan is. I'm more bothered about East Hampshire. Was there a drastic reduction in the number of homes that had to be built in East Hampshire as a result of the MP's intervention and proactive reasoning and discussions with them? Do you know that, or could you let me know later? Thank you.
Chair, there was a reduction in the housing provision within the East Hampshire core strategy. I don't know whether or not it's a result of any intervention by the MP, but that's now about 8 years ago, and the circumstances have now changed in South Downs. They have now their own local plan with their own target within it.
Thank you. And just one final thing is, if Councillor Purdy is watching, can I urge him to have a word with the MP and see if we can get her to be as vociferous and vocal in our case as it seems the MP was down in Hampshire? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Raine. Councillor Butler. Not Buttle, Butler. Sorry.
Yep. Yes, it's a clarification really. So in the report, there are 6 options. Recommendation 2 is that we're supporting option 5. Is that right? So so that means that this is not about the next steps. This is about supporting option 5, which is fundamentally different to saying this is rubber stamping the exercise of the local plan working group. This is about saying we support option 5, which is for the high growth